Yeah? Okay. Today we've seen a side proposition that doesn't really understand the nature of these groups. On one hand, they tell you these groups are super violent, but on the other hand, they tell you these groups will be totally fine with paying people thousands of dollars to leave and spread the message about how much these groups suck. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that's the right dichotomy on side proposition, and it's for that reason that we're proud to oppose the resolution. I'll be doing two things for you today. I'm an extension speaker. I'll be bringing you an extension about the structure of these groups and how it's going to lead to more harm when we implement this resolution, and I'll be rebutting what we've heard down the bench on side proposition. So let's get right into that, starting with what we heard from Lewis and Quinn. And the first idea that we really heard was aiding in reintegration. And we heard this idea that the burden must fall on the group, but we don't think that's really been tackled by our side so far. So let's get right into that. Now, we think that, first of all, we don't think it's necessarily the group that the burden falls on. We think it would actually be the family that's chosen to raise a child in that environment, but furthermore, we think that that community think that that's the right thing to do. They think that that is a believable and positive thing to do. They don't see it as a negative thing. They're not trying to harm a child. We think it's really harmful when you tell them, oh, you're doing it wrong. The burden falls on your community because a parent decided to raise a child in an environment they're not going to like. We don't think that's fair to say. But secondly, we then heard this really weird idea from Quinn that these groups are actually funded by the government to build up schools and to do all sorts of amazing things, and that's why they have the money to do this. Ladies and gentlemen, what they're effectively saying by that is that the money that these groups have comes from the government, therefore it's the government paying to let these people reintegrate into society. That's what we're advocating for, but that's not what they're saying. We think that's a bit contradictory. But furthermore, we would tell you, if it's the government that's paying and setting up these schools that's not teaching children about countries, about prime ministers, about education in the world and technology, we think the government shares a bit of that burden because they funded this lifestyle, but yet, when they want to reintegrate, they're not willing to take responsibility for the lax education that they funded. That's pretty harmful. With that, we think that responsibility is shifted. Okay, then we heard from Michael this idea about more accountability. We heard a couple main ideas. First of all, he told us that essentially you get a lot more transparency because when people leave the group, they're going to spread the message about how awful this group was and how oppressive it was. And what we would tell you is that that's ridiculous, because if that group was that oppressive and that abusive, they're not going to let this person, let alone pay for this person, to leave and say this group should be shut down, they're evil and they've oppressed me, ladies and gentlemen. That's not the kind of group we're talking about in this resolution. But furthermore, they told us the idea that ultimately these groups are going to be incentivized to be nicer to their people so they won't want to defect. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, we think there are a lot of groups who are already nice to their people. The people disagree on the ideological basis that they want technology, right? They can't get nicer because if they provide technology, they contradict their religious beliefs. They can't get nicer because what they're doing is based on their religious creed. It's not based on them wanting to oppress people. That's actually how they believe a society should be run. They can't get nicer. So what that means is that when people are still defecting and it's costing them money, they're going to start being punitive about it. That's what I'm going to talk to you now. So first of all, let's talk about this idea of the structure of the groups. And Ben briefly touched on this, but I'm going to show you the implications of it. What we would tell you is the majority of these religious groups or cults are agriculture-based, right? They're groups that rely on traditional crafts. They're groups that rely on subsistence farming. They're groups that don't have money pouring out of their pockets. And as Quinn so eloquently explained, they get money from the government, apparently. I'll take your POI now.
Let me know if you understand it wrong. So basically what I was saying is that these groups receive money from the government. So they're not just like spending all their own money on having these things built, like schools. They have money available because, as you said, they're agricultural communities with an economy. Don't you agree?
Okay, right. The difference is I didn't say there were agricultural economies with free market enterprise, ladies and gentlemen. No, they're subsistence economy, as in I will plant herbs in my backyard and use it to feed my community. Not I want to start a new multinational conglomerate and make profit off of my vegetables. I don't think that's what these groups are going for. No, thank you. Ultimately, they aren't really integrated in the global economy. They don't have money pouring out of their pockets left and right. And even so, if the government is spending that money, they are still funding this. We think it's their responsibility. No, thank you. But let's get into this idea about the structure. Now, what we would tell you is when you have that kind of structure and the groups are unable to pay for the defecting members, that's when you get previously benign groups turning into oppressive and abusive groups because they create a culture of indoctrination. They can't afford having people defecting questioning left and right, so they start isolating people further. They don't even tell their kids that there's a world outside their community. They don't even mention the fact that there's technology. They actually start creating a culture that's filled with shame and abuse if you try to leave or question their ideology. We think that's really harmful when you have previously benign and beneficial groups who are now throwing their kids to the wolves because they don't want to pay money for that, ladies and gentlemen, because they simply can't afford it. So ultimately, we see a side proposition that contradicted itself, talked about government funding, but tried to push the burden onto religious groups, and ultimately just seemed kind of confused. We're proud to oppose.